Hello viewers, and welcome to another installment of the LOTR LCG progression series by Cardboard of the Rings, the bi-weekly podcast about the Lord of the Rings, the card game, which is a living card game by Fantasy Flight Games. Joining you as always, this is Mitch, and with me is Matthew.
Hello.
And today we're going to be taking a look at the hero and 9 player cards of the 5th adventure pack of the Shadows of Mirkwood cycle, the Dead Marshes. So to start things off, Matthew, why don't you introduce us to our new tactics hero?
So the latest and greatest hero for this adventure pack is Boromir, who clocks in at an 11 threat cost, 1 willpower, 3 attack strength, 2 defense strength, 5 hit points, 3 traits, Gondor, Noble, and Warrior, and he has 2 actions. The first reads, raise your threat by 1 to ready Boromir, and his second action reads, discard Boromir to deal 2 damage to each enemy engaged with a single player. Lots of things I think to say about Boromir. I'll start off with just a few. First, I think he's a very thematic character. This has nothing to do with gameplay, of course, but I like both of his actions in that they sort of fit his portrayal in the novel The Fellowship of the Ring. But beyond that, I think he's a great attacker, certainly. He does offer some willpower. He sort of reminds me of Aragorn in that he can ready himself, albeit more easily in a sense, though you're adding more and more to your threat. Beyond that, I think he would combo most efficiently with other direct damage effects. So characters like Thalon or the Longbeard Orc Slayer, right? If they're dealing damage to enemies that are coming off the encounter deck, you're a turn maybe away from winning, but you don't have the strength or something to deal with all the enemies coming off. You sack Boromir to do 2 damage with all those engaged with you, so you can make that maybe the final quest push. So he certainly is the first hero that has the ability to discard himself, and I find that to be pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think you mentioned that he's a really strong thematic character, and just like when he ends up dying in the Fellowship of the Rings, the way that he does that is fighting this giant onslaught of orcs. So the way that he can take care of this in the game is just like you touched on. It certainly helps if you've kind of softened up the enemies coming off of the encounter deck, since he himself doesn't have an extremely high attack strength. He's kind of reliant on effects like Dwarven Axe or Blade of Gondolin, maybe Dunedain Mark, to kind of bolster his attack strength, but because you can continually raise his threat to in some ways give him unlimited actions each turn, he really can take on any number of adversaries coming off of the encounter deck. I kind of see him in one of 2 different ways. One is where he's that extremely powerful attacker. Maybe you even throw the new attachment we're going to be talking about, Dunedain Cash, on him. So he's got ranged, he's potentially able to clear the entire board of enemies, so long as you can stomach that threat increase. But on the flip side, he can also be quite a powerful defender, so if you're able to load him up with attachments like Dunedain Warning, perhaps, or Citadel Plate, he can just as easily become a powerful tank for the players and take on just hordes and hordes of enemies.
You know, come to think of it, Boromir actually dies in the 2 towers. The first chapter is sort of what resolves that battle there along the river. Peter Jackson's movie, of course, pushes it up into the Fellowship of the Ring, which I think actually probably makes for a better ending. With that said, though, I think Boromir, much like Bjorn, much like the Longbeard Orc Slayer, and some of these other characters, has such a cool, really epic ability. But how often are you really going to use it? Short of the one video that you filmed with Brandon, one of the Khazad-dûm quests, where you guys just got completely overwhelmed, and then he sacked the ability even though it didn't really kill much. All the times I've played with him, or I've, played with buddies and they've used him, no one has ever used that ability, the second action. They're really using him for the first. So while I think it's super cool that it could be done, especially if it would be taking out a lot of orcs with you, it's not all that helpful. And of course, Boromir, if you're using that second action, really isn't a score-friendly hero.
Certainly when I put together any deck, I'm definitely not looking at any sort of effect where I'm counting on heroes leaving play, and I like the fact that Boromir has a strong base ability. If anything, his second ability is almost just kind of like a little bit of a flavor or lore nod to players that recognize the role that he ended up playing at the beginning of Two Towers, like you said. But overall, I just like his ability in that he's able to take care of any number of enemies or attacks or defenses each turn. You just need to make absolute certain that either you yourself can take care of threat reduction effects by maybe Gandalf, or Sneak Attack Gandalf, or the Galadrim's Greeting, or maybe you've got Wandering Tukes that you can bounce over to another player. But Boromir is certainly not the most score-friendly hero in some respects, just like you mentioned for his ability, but at the same time, if you can maybe spend a few threat here and there to take some additional actions, save yourself some turns in the long run, Boromir can actually help players just absolutely speed through a scenario, so... Really, the only other thing I think worth mentioning about Boromir is that if players are going to be taking advantage of his action to maybe combine defensive and offensive actions, it's certainly worth considering adding less often played cards like For Gondor or perhaps Blade Mastery to your deck, just so that he can not only get an attack power boost, but also a defensive boost. So if he's going to be playing multiple roles, you might as well milk those cards for all that they're worth. Well, let's go ahead and take a look at our new leadership cards of this adventure pack, and first up is Dunedain Watcher, which is an ally, cost of 3, with 1 willpower, 1 attack, 1 defense, and 2 hit points. It is trait Dunedain, and has response. Discard Dunedain Watcher from play to cancel the shadow effects of a card just triggered. So right off the bat, this kind of continues to speak toward the flexibility and versatility of leadership, and now that they're delving into Spirit once again to be able to cancel some shadow effects, it's certainly a little bit more expensive than similar leadership allies we've seen, like Guard of the Citadel, perhaps Keen-Eyed Took, but what are your thoughts, Matthew? Do you think she's worth her response?
Well, oftentimes you and I have discussed the difference between events and permanents. And oftentimes we come down the side of we'd rather have that permanent ally over some of the more hefty costed events. This one sort of fits in that category for me. Hasty Stroke certainly comes to mind when I'm thinking of this card. The Spirit event from the core set, which cancels shadow effects. It only costs 1, but once it's gone, unless you're playing Dwarven Tomb or something like that. This is an ally that, until you need it, can be questing, attacking, or maybe defending, though it's somewhat fragile. So I think it certainly has some use and can do other things while you're waiting for a shadow effect that's just nasty and you want to get rid of it. And of course, if you discard the Dunedain Watcher, that's going to ready Prince Imrahil, or deal with other leading play effects like Valiant Sacrifice or whatnot.
It certainly is much more of an initial investment than Spirit's Hasty Stroke, but just like you say, it's kind of proactive. You're making that initial investment, but it's doing a lot more for you than just an event sitting in your hand. So maybe you've got Faramir on the table, and this is going to give you an additional 2 willpower each turn. Maybe when it leaves play, just like you mentioned Prince Imrahil, maybe you're waiting to play a Valiant Sacrifice from your hand, or you've got a Horn of Gondor in play, so there are a number of different effects that can benefit from this just sitting on the table. Really, the only shame about this is, at this point in the game, we haven't seen any Dunedain synergy to speak of.
Right. I think you mentioned in one of our previous videos that you're sort of, you felt that you've matured as a player. I think that this was a card I absolutely overlooked when it first came out, and now that I'm taking a sort of a fresh look at it in many ways, I'm sort of attracted to it, and I wouldn't be surprised if I include it in a deck at some point.
Sure. I mean, just taking a look at our playthrough of A Journey to Rosgobel, we thought about both of us running Spirit just to be able to do some additional cancel when revealed effects. So if we find ourselves in a situation where we're really trying to avoid some brutal shadow effects, this is just one more way to try and take care of that without having to do a ton of sphere management tricks.
Like 2 swarming insects in a row that kill a hero?
Something like that.
Right. Well, let's take a look at our second leadership card, which is the Dunedain Cache. It has a cost of 2. It's an attachment, which is also an item. It must attach to a hero, and the attached hero gains range. And as with all of the Dunedain cards so far, you pay 1 resource from the attached hero's pool to attach it to another hero. I think that this is perhaps somewhat useful. Because, as we've seen in our progression series so far, and as we'll see as we get into Khazad Dûm, there are certain enemies that can only be attacked or defended by ranged characters, the Mirkwood Flock or the Black Forest Bats from the Rosgobel Adventure Pack. So if you don't want to include ranged characters for some reason, this is a way around it. Otherwise, though, it's probably better if you're playing leadership just to play the Silverlode Archer. But, you know, I guess this is just one other way to make sure you're getting ranged out in order to deal with that.
I think when this card first came out, one of the gripes players had with it is the ranged effect doesn't really benefit solo players very much, with the exception of A Journey to Rosgobel, and we'll see this kind of crop up again in future adventure packs. But one nice use about this, despite it being a little bit expensive and despite your having to rely on the timely draw of this for it to be of any use, is if you do have a strong hero, say, like Boromir on the table, where he can clear any number of enemies in one round. As soon as you tack ranged onto him, he can essentially clear the board of enemies. So any enemy engaged with any player is suddenly vulnerable to his readying ability, or if one player has Gimli on the table loaded up with a ton of damage tokens that's just able to make massive attacks. You know, if you just so happen to get your support player with a lot of weak, non-combat heroes with some sort of nasty enemy engaged with him or her, then Dunedain Cash can allow a big attacking hero to finally, you know, contribute their attacks without having to rely on effects like Son of Arnor and other things like that. So on to tactics, the first new card of which is an ally called Vassal of the Windlord, which has a cost of 1, 0 willpower, 3 attack, 0 defense, and 1 hit point. It is traits Creature and Eagle, and has ranged. Additionally, Vassal of the Windlord cannot have restricted attachments and forced. After an attack in which Vassal of the Windlord attacked resolves, discard Vassal of the Windlord from play. So, I can't think of too much negative to say about this card. It's a very cheap, very powerful attacking ally. It, of course, is kind of a one-time use, but it's great with Radagast, and it's yet another eagle to fetch with The Eagles Are Coming.
Right. I think Vassal of the Windlord's one of my favorite of all of the Eagles. He certainly combos well with the Horn of Gondor, Prince Imrahil. And as much as, you know, we try to restrain ourselves from mentioning future cycles, I think Vassal of the Windlord just absolutely shines in the current Heirs of Numenor because we're questing with attack strength in many cases, and so he can quest for 3, and you don't have to discard him. So he is definitely a staple of some of my current decks. He was a staple of my decks back in Shadows of Mirkwood, even into Khazad Dûm. I don't know if this guy has left my deck in quite a while, so I don't have enough good things to say about Vassal of the Windlord.
Yeah, I mean, for the price of 1 resource, you really can't go wrong with 3 attack strength. Even something like Veteran Axe Hand is 2 attack strength, but this is ranged. If you have a Horn of Gondor on the table, it's essentially free. If you're able to ready Prince Imrahil, that's great. It's a simple target for Valiant Sacrifice. It's something that you can rely on leaving play. Even a Spirit player can go ahead and bring this back into play with Stand and Fight, just because, again, with that ranged keyword, if there's any single combat where he needs to contribute that threat, he can go ahead and do that. And he also works perfectly as a cheap, affordable chump blocker. So this is certainly far more versatile than an attachment. It's not too likely to be doing any questing for you in the, you know, current state of the game, but I just really think you can't go wrong. It's an absolute tactics staple, Eagle deck or not.
So let's take a look at Song of Mocking, which has a cost of 1. It's an attachment and also a song. It must attach to a hero, and its action reads, exhaust Song of Mocking to choose another hero. Until the end of the phase, attached hero takes all damage assigned to the chosen hero. Interestingly, this is our very first song card that is not a neutral card. It belongs to one of the 4 spheres. And I think it has a couple of uses. One, it could be used to protect a very fragile hero. I sort of think of this card as Sentinel in reverse. So, especially when it comes to direct damage from treachery cards or shadow effects that a Sentinel character maybe couldn't do much about, but this is a way to get that damage onto someone else to protect your more fragile hero. Maybe Frodo, if he's already used his his response, and would have to put the damage on him. But really, any fragile hero, I think, would be good. And you'd probably want to divert the damage to someone like Gimli or Glowin. Gimli to boost up his attack strength, of course, and then Glowin to boost up the resources that he's generating. I don't think it's a card I've ever used, but again, I think it's interesting, and it's certainly worth some consideration.
Yeah, it's certainly a little bit situational. I do like that it's a nice preventive measure. So let's say Eowyn is in play and she has a damage token or two on her. If you're at risk of taking damage from treachery cards before staging, you can go ahead and activate this. And maybe if there's damage coming from a treachery card, Glowin can kind of absorb that for Eowyn or whatever it happens to be. You mentioned this is similar to Sentinel, which it is, but one of the issues with this is it doesn't take any advantage of the defense value of the hero that has Song of Mocking attached. So if you're using this to, say, absorb an undefended attack from another player or a very high attack strength attack, even if you've loaded this up onto some super defender character, if they're loaded with Dunedain warnings and other things like that, this doesn't have anything to do with it. So it works great with effects like Citadel Plate and Self-Preservation, but really it's a little bit tricky to use. It's not always going to be useful, and I guess I prefer just my cancellation effects and selective engagement over Song of Mocking. So on to Spirit, and the first new card is an ally named Helm, who is unique with a cost of 4, with 1 willpower, 2 attack strength, 2 defense strength, and 3 hit points. It is yet another Rohan ally, and also a warrior, and it has the curious ability, while Helm is ready, he gains response. After your threat is raised, as the result of questing unsuccessfully, or by an encounter or quest card effect, reduce your threat by 1. So, he's a unique ally, similar to Eomund for the Spirit Sphere. He's got a pretty decent attack strength for the not-too-combat-oriented Spirit Sphere. His stats are actually identical to those of Northern Tracker. I like that he negates the Doomed 1 keyword completely for 1 player, but other than that, he has to be ready for his ability to have any effect, so you can't really quest with him. You kind of have to leave him open for attacking or defending, and I guess I'm just not sure if he's really worth that cost at this point in the game.
Yeah, he is a little pricey, but I think he's, again, another card in Spirit that can help with threat management. And he's also one of the better attackers or defenders for Spirit. You mentioned he has the same stats and the same cost as a Northern Tracker, but that's a character that you're going to be exclusively questing with. This way, he has a willpower, but you're probably going to be leaving this guy ready, so you get to take advantage of his relatively decent attack, defense strength, and pool of hit points. So, I don't think he's a bad card in any way, and I think it could certainly help manage that threat to a minuscule degree. Is he the best ally we've ever seen? No, but I certainly don't think he's the worst.
Yeah, I just think the trick is, with him, threat gains are generally going to come from staged cards during the quest phase, so if you're using him to quest, then you're not really going to be able to reduce any threat gain from that, and if you're using him for combat, unless you're saving him to attack, you're probably not going to be able to reduce the threat gain from shadow cards. So maybe there'll be situations like where Marsh Adder attacks and you have to raise your threat by 1, or you're raising your threat by an additional 1 from Gladden Fields, where he'll be able to kind of work around that. If you are planning on having Eomund leaving play, then that works perfectly with Helm. He certainly has a lot more utility once we get into the Heirs of Numenor cycle, but for the present moment, for that cost, I'm much more likely to put a Northern Tracker into play.
Right, I think I largely agree. Of course, he could also be readied with everyone's favorite hero, Brand, Son of Bane. If he's able to kill an enemy that's engaged with the controller of Elfhelm, then this would be a candidate for readying, either to maybe lower your threat again for some reason, or just to do some other attack or defense. But again, we're coming up with these sort of funky situations to get him ready to take advantage of his ability and his stats. And that usually tends to indicate a card that isn't all that strong.
Yeah, but he does work perfectly with our next spirit card, so why don't you introduce us to it?
Absolutely. The card is We Do Not Sleep. With a hefty cost of 5, it's an event. Action. Until the end of the phase, Rohan characters do not exhaust to commit to quests. I've said multiple times here that the Rohan trait isn't all that developed, though it's currently, again, in Heirs of Numenor, getting some love, but it's very expensive. There are only 12 Rohan characters at this point in the game, in the core set and Shadows of Mirkwood. 3 heroes, 9 allies, provided I did my math correctly and looked my card research correctly. Nor Am I a Stranger also gives the Rohan trait, as do some of the, again, aforementioned Heirs of Numenor cards will also give the Rohan trait. So, this could be a good card, but still, the cost of 5 is so steep. If you were playing in 3 spirit heroes, it would still take you 2 rounds to save up for this, with 1 left over. And while the effect would be powerful, I'm just not sure it's worth that investment.
Yeah, when you take a look at some of the characters that we would have at this point to commit to the quest, other than Eowyn, it's Theodred and Dune here, whom are each contributing 1 willpower. Sure, they've got a little bit of attack strength, but they're making a pretty marginal questing gain. Some other ones, like the Snowborn Scout and Horseback Archer, don't have any willpower at all, so they're not benefiting from this, despite being Rohan characters. And some others, you're of course seeing a little bit of a gain, but maybe the escort from Aedoras is going to end up being discarded from play, so it's not going to take advantage of this effect, and really, a lot of them are just relatively weak willpower allies, so until we see some sort of effect like Faramir, where he's really boosting the willpower ability of a lot of characters, this is a pretty marginal effect for a cost of 5, and if I had to pick a 5-cost event that involves readying characters, I'd be much more likely to pick Leadership's Grim Resolve, just because, every single character you have is suddenly benefiting from this effect, so anyone from Gimli to Barivor to whomever is able to commit to quest and be unexhausted through staging to do whatever you want them to the rest of the round. So to begin to wrap up this adventure pack, why don't we take a look at our final sphere, which is lore. And the first card that we see is an ally named Sylvan Tracker for a cost of 3, with 1 willpower, 1 attack, 1 defense, and 3 hit points. It has the Sylvan trait and a response. After a Sylvan character readies during the refresh phase, heal 1 damage from that character. So, similar to the Dunedain Watcher, it's a 3-cost ally with relatively weak stats. It doesn't really excel at any one thing. It's okay at attacking, it's alright at defending, so I like that in some ways this combos with itself, so if there are multiple Sylvan Trackers in play, they can defend repeatedly against relatively weak enemies and heal one another, but other than that, what do you think about some of our existing Sylvan characters?
Well, there's only 7 Sylvan allies at this point, and Legolas is the only Sylvan hero. A lot of the Sylvan allies only have 1 hit point, so they're going to get absolutely no benefit from the Sylvan Tracker. I think it's a high cost with low stats, though the hit points are okay, and I absolutely like the ability. The problem is, much like all of these Rohan cards, we don't have enough characters to really benefit from this. We haven't even really seen all that many Sylvan characters past Shadows of Mirkwood. So, until they start making a bunch of Sylvan allies that are really special and don't have just 1 single solitary hit point, I think Sylvan Tracker is probably best left in the binder.
Yeah, I think that's the major problem with this guy, is it's a really cool ability, but of course that character has to be exhausted, that character has to, first of all, have more than 1 hit point. Cards like Daughter of the Nimrodel, Hinnamarth River Song, Silverlode Archer, those are all Sylvan, which is great, but as soon as they take 1 point of damage, they're not going to be around long enough to heal anything. This is certainly a great effect with Haldir of Lorien, so he's got that 2 defense, 3 hit points, he has Sentinel, he's a great defender if you slap Burning Brand on him. If you do have Sylvan Trackers in play, He's pretty good, but think of all the resources that you have to invest in that. So Haldir is 4, a Burning Brand is 2, each Sylvan Tracker is 3, just to heal, 1 hit point per phase. So I really think for that cost, you'd probably see more from a self-preservation at this point, given that Haldir is unique, and it's certainly much more flexible than this ally.
While I might be somewhat underwhelmed by Sylvan Tracker, I actually like the next lore card, which is Fast Hitch. It's an attachment with a cost of 1, it's a skill, and it must attach to a Hobbit character. Action, exhaust Fast Hitch to ready attached character. At this point in the game, we only have 2 Hobbit heroes, Frodo and Bilbo, though recently we've had some spoilers that we'll be getting other Hobbit heroes. We also have a few Hobbit allies, the Keen-Eyed and the Wandering Took, which I think are both relatively underwhelming. This is a cheaper version of Unexpected Courage, and so if you're playing Hobbits, either Bilbo or Frodo, I think this is a great attachment for either one of them.
Yeah, I definitely think since Frodo's got that natural 2 willpower, you can commit him to the quest. You can use Fast Hitch to ready him for maybe performing escape tests like we're going to see in the Dead Marshes in our next video. Maybe you can play this on Bilbo, and if he's got a Burning Brand on him, maybe some Dunedain warnings and things like that, perhaps Protector of Lorien, he can transform into a relatively mediocre quester, marginal defender, to actually being pretty competent, and you can really put that, Protector of Lorien, sacrificing all of those cards to really great use if you can defend against multiple attacks, automatically cancel those shadow effects. So, just like you said, this is basically the Hobbit Unexpected Courage, and just like Sylvan Tracker, whether or not you like this now, it only stands to become more and more powerful as our card pool continues to expand. And last but not least is the final and 4th song to round out the songs of the 4 different spheres of influence, which is Song of Battle. So for a cost of 1, just like we've seen before, this is a song, and it's neutral. It reads, attached to a hero, attached hero gains a tactics resource icon. So after 5 adventure packs, you tactics players that dabble in other spheres can finally have a little bit of resource fixing for yourselves. This, of course, works great with Rivendell Minstrel. And what else does it work with, Matthew?
So, obviously this is the best of all the songs, in my opinion. But, if you wanted, as with all the songs, if you want to take advantage of the powerhouse cards from a certain sphere, but not play heroes of that sphere, this is the way to do it. So if you want to take advantage of the ever-powerful Feint, but you, again, don't want to include any sort of tactics heroes, this is the way to do so. And so I think that in and of itself may be worth including this song in your deck.
Sure, it can certainly allow players to get much more combat ability than they might otherwise have access to, a lot of powerful attachments and allies, maybe things like the Horn of Gondor for additional resource acceleration if you're planning on having a lot of Rohan characters or other characters just leaving play. And really I think the other use that jumps out at me for this card is if players aren't using a mono tactics deck, they can maybe run 2 tactics heroes or 1 tactics hero, have some minstrels fetch this for them, and as long as you have a tactics resource match for each of your characters, you've finally got access to that extremely powerful thicket of spears. So it gives a little bit more flexibility to players in trying to include that in a deck. I think all of the songs are very powerful, and Song of Battle is no different. So, I guess now that we've taken a look at our 1 new hero card and our 9 new player cards, any overall impressions of the strengths or weaknesses of this allotment of player cards, Matthew?
Well, this may be a tired refrain by now, but as with all of the Shadow of Mirkwood cycle, I think there's hits and there misses. And it probably wouldn't surprise me for the entire life of this game, with every adventure pack, every deluxe expansion, I'll probably say the same thing. I think the hero was solid. The leadership cards certainly have some uses. Love Vassal of the Windlord. Fast Hitch is fantastic, and of course Song of Battle is the best card yet printed by FFG. So, I think it's an okay pack. I'm not sure if it's a stellar pack, but there's definitely some solid cards here.
Certainly. Boromir is definitely a fan favorite card. Some people use him to absolutely fantastic effect, just being able to clear the board of enemies. The Dunedain cards we've seen are kind of hit and miss. I definitely appreciate Dunedain Watcher more than I used to, but the cash can be pretty difficult to dig for when you need it. Vassal is something I play with even today. The Spirit cards didn't really do it for me. Fast Hitch is of course a lore staple. I love that with Frodo Baggins, and how can someone go wrong with a card like Song of Battle? It really is a staple in any sort of, resource fixing multi-sphere environment. So with that said, any final thoughts?
Nope, I'm just looking forward to playing through the Dead Marshes and hopefully surviving those escape tests.
Alright, well, with that said, I believe you guys should know the routine by now. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button. If you enjoy this content and you've yet to subscribe, please feel free to do so. As always, we encourage you guys to leave any clever or unique uses that we happen to miss for any of these player or hero cards. Just like Matthew said, next up is our actual scenario playthrough for the Dead Marshes, so we'll see you guys next time.